The morning sun cast long shadows across the Ambassador Bridge, connecting Windsor, Ontario to Detroit, Michigan, but the usual steady stream of Canadian license plates had dwindled to a trickle. What was once one of the busiest border crossings in North America now bore witness to an unprecedented phenomenon. Canadians were simply choosing to stay home. For 7 consecutive months, a nation that had traditionally viewed its southern neighbor as an extension of its own backyard was pulling back, creating ripples that would reshape the very fabric of North American tourism and cross-border relations. The numbers told a story that travel industry executives could hardly believe. In July 2025, car travel from Canada to the United States plummeted by nearly 37% compared to the previous year, while air travel suffered an equally devastating 26% decline. These were not mere statistical fluctuations or seasonal variations, but the manifestation of a deeper malaise that had settled over the Canada and United States relationship, like a persistent winter fog. Canada sends more tourists to America than any other country, with Canadians making over 20 million visits to the USA last year and spending more than $20 billion. Making this decline not just significant, but economically transformative. The roots of this unprecedented travel boycott stretched back to the early days of Donald Trump's presidency, when what began as trade disagreements evolved into something far more personal and visceral. The president's aggressive rhetoric toward America's northern neighbor had escalated beyond traditional diplomatic discourse, encompassing not just trade policies but what many Canadians perceived as existential threats to their national sovereignty. The mention of annexation, once relegated to the realm of political satire and late-night comedy shows, had entered serious political discourse, sending shockwaves through Canadian society from coast to coast to coast. Trade policies became the concrete manifestation of these deteriorating relations, with tariffs imposed on Canadian goods creating a domino effect that touched every aspect of the bilateral relationship. When governments engage in trade wars, the casualties extend far beyond boardrooms and legislative chambers, reaching into the daily lives of ordinary citizens who suddenly find their vacation plans entangled in geopolitical tensions. The psychological impact of these policies created an atmosphere where a simple weekend getaway to New York City or a shopping trip to Seattle began to feel like an act of betrayal to one's own country. For generations, the Canada and United States border had been more of an administrative line than a true barrier, with families spread across both sides and communities that functioned as single economic and cultural units. Despite being divided by an international boundary, the concept of spillover cities like Detroit, Windsor, Buffalo, Niagara Falls, and Seattle, Vancouver had defined cross-border life, where residents routinely crossed for work, shopping, entertainment, and family visits without giving it a second thought. This seamless integration was built on decades of trust, shared values, and mutual respect that suddenly felt fragile and uncertain. The travel industry on both sides of the border began to feel the immediate effects of this cultural shift, with airlines reporting significant drops in bookings on traditionally popular routes. Airlines, tour groups, and destinations are seeing big drops in business amid anger in Canada over President Donald Trump's tariffs and annexation threats. With some carriers cutting back USA flights from Canada due to weaker demand, travel agents who had built their businesses around cross-border tourism found themselves scrambling to redirect their Canadian clients toward European, Asian, or domestic destinations, fundamentally altering travel patterns that had remained stable for decades. The psychological dimension of this travel decline cannot be understated, as it represents more than just economic considerations or practical concerns about border crossings. Many Canadians began to experience what could be described as a form of cultural cognitive dissonance, where a country they had long viewed as a familiar extension of their own began to feel foreign and unwelcoming. Social media platforms filled with stories of Canadians feeling uncomfortable or unwanted while traveling in the United States, creating a feedback loop that reinforced the decision to stay home or seek alternative destinations. Tourism destinations that had depended heavily on Canadian visitors found themselves facing an unprecedented challenge, particularly in border states like New York, Washington, Montana, and North Dakota, where Canadian tourism had been a cornerstone of the local economy for generations. Ski resorts in Vermont and Colorado, shopping outlets in North Dakota and Minnesota, and cultural attractions in cities like Boston and Chicago all reported significant drops in Canadian visitation, forcing them to reassess their marketing strategies and revenue projections for the foreseeable future. The economic implications extended far beyond the tourism sector itself, creating what economists began to refer to as the trust deficit in the bilateral relationship, when citizens of two countries that share the world's longest undefended border begin to avoid each other's territories. The ramifications spread through every sector of the economy, from retail and hospitality to transportation and financial services. The United States began to face the prospect of widening its already substantial travel deficit, as the loss of Canadian visitors represented not just numbers, but the departure of some of the highest spending and most frequent international tourists. Currency fluctuations added another layer of complexity to the situation, as trade tensions and political uncertainty caused the Canadian dollar to weaken against its American counterpart, making United States travel more expensive for Canadians, even without considering the emotional and political factors. This economic reality created a practical barrier that reinforced the psychological reluctance to travel south, creating a perfect storm of conditions that discouraged cross-border movement. The cultural implications of this travel decline began to manifest in unexpected ways. Communities that had thrived on cross-border relationships found themselves increasingly isolated from their traditional partners and markets. Sister cities that had celebrated their shared heritage and mutual cooperation for decades suddenly found their festivals, cultural exchanges, and business partnerships suffering from decreased participation and enthusiasm. The fabric of North American continental integration, built carefully over generations, began to show signs of strain. Canadian families who had traditionally made annual pilgrimages to Disney World, spent summers at Myrtle Beach, or maintained vacation homes in Florida, began to explore alternatives that many had never previously considered. The Canadian tourism industry itself began to benefit from this shift, as domestic travel increased and Canadian dollars that would have flowed south remained within the national economy. Destinations like the Maritimes, the Canadian Rockies, and the Yukon Territory experienced unexpected booms as Canadians rediscovered their own country's attractions. The service industry workers who had built their livelihoods around serving Canadian tourists in American border communities faced particularly challenging circumstances. Restaurant servers, hotel clerks, retail workers, and attraction staff who had come to rely on the friendly, familiar faces of Canadian visitors found their tips decreasing and their hours being cut as establishments struggled with a dramatic decline in cross-border tourism. These human stories represented the real cost of political tensions, as individual lives and livelihoods became casualties of larger geopolitical disputes. The phenomenon also highlighted the interconnected nature of modern North American society, where political decisions made in Washington could have immediate and profound impacts on the daily lives of citizens hundreds or thousands of miles away. Small business owners in border communities who had never paid much attention to politics suddenly found themselves experts in trade policy and diplomatic relations, as their financial survival became directly tied to the state of Canada and United States relations. As the seventh month of consecutive decline passed, what had initially been viewed as a temporary reaction to political tensions began to look more like a fundamental shift in North American travel patterns. The implications extended far beyond tourism statistics, representing a potential transformation in the relationship between two nations that had long prided themselves on their friendship, cooperation, and shared values. The Great Northern Exodus had become more than a travel trend. It had evolved into a powerful statement about the fragility of international relationships and the speed with which trust, once broken, can reshape the most fundamental aspects of how neighboring peoples interact with one another. The story of Canadian travel decline serves as a powerful reminder that in our interconnected world, political decisions ripple far beyond legislative chambers and boardrooms, touching the lives of ordinary families who simply want to explore, connect, and experience the world around them. As we continue to monitor these developing patterns in North American relations, one thing remains clear: the choices made by political leaders today will echo through generations, reshaping not just policies, but the very cultural fabric that binds neighboring nations together. The numbers tell us about declining statistics, but the human stories behind them reveal something far more profound about trust, belonging, and the delicate nature of international friendship. If you found this deep dive into Canadian politics and global influence insightful, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell to stay updated on our latest analyses of political trends shaping our world. Share this video with anyone interested in understanding how political tensions translate into real-world consequences. And let us know in the comments what other aspects of Canadian-American relations you would like us to explore. Here at West is Best, we are committed to bringing you thoughtful, comprehensive coverage of the political developments that matter most. So do not forget to like this video and subscribe for more in-depth political analysis that goes beyond the headlines.